Hey guys, welcome back to the Curly Reader. My name's Amanda, and today I want to share with you all of the books I read during the month of April. So during the month of April, I read 18 books. I don't know why or how I did that, but I just have a lot more time to read. So I am going to share with you all of the books I read. I'm going to start with the one I liked the least and work my way up to the one I like the most. I'm also going to be sharing with you my Owls wrap up. I was able to complete all 12 of the Owls prompts, which I'm very happy about. But I will share with you as I get through these books which ones completed which prompts for the Owls readathon. But yeah, so let's just get started. My least favorite and my 2-star rating for the month is Cosmic Commandos by Christopher Eliopoulos. This is a middle grade graphic novel. It is very, very just basic. I love Christopher Eliopoulos' illustration style. This is one that I read during the Stay Home Reading Rush. So if you want to know more of my thoughts about this, you can check out that vlog. I will link it down below and up in the cards. This way, whichever way. I think it's this way. But anyway, it was good. It was just very simple. And so I gave it 2 stars. All right. My 3-star book that came in next is The Giraffe, the Pelly, and Me. This one I completed for the challenge of to read a book with an animal with a beak on the cover. And there's a pelican right here. So that counted. And that was for, which owl was that for? Now I have to look it up. That was for Care of Magical Creatures. So this completed the Care of Magical Creatures owl. It was very, very, very short. It's by Roald Dahl. It is about a giraffe, a pelican, and a monkey who have a ladderless window cleaning company. And this little boy comes in contact with them, and they kind of have a little bit of an adventure. And it was cute. It was 3 stars. It wasn't anything fantastic. Wasn't anything awful. It was just okay. So, but it completed the owl for me. The next one that I read is Moo by Sharon Creech. This is one that I had gotten out. I think I did this. This was part of my try a chapter tag that I did in middle grade March. And this was to complete the challenge of to read a book with a white cover, which was Charms. Sorry, I have my cheat sheet here. So that was Charms. And this one was cute. It's kind of partially written in free verse, partially written in prose. But it is all about a little girl who is from New York City, moves to Maine, and kind of gets involved with cattle showing for 4-H. And that's kind of what it revolves around. It was good. It just was kind of, like I said, simple. There wasn't really a whole lot of depth to it. But it was enjoyable and it was a quick read. So got that one done. The next one that I have here is The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. And this is one I read during the Stay Home Reading Rush, but it also filled the prompt for, where is it? Potions, which is to read a book under 150 pages. This one was 110. And it is a story, well, it's a book. It's all these little vignettes of this girl who lives in a Latino community in Chicago. And it's just kind of her coming of age story. I thought it was nonfiction. It's not. It's fiction. And it was good. I definitely understand the importance of this book and what it did for Latina authors. And the representation that's in this is fantastic, but I just didn't really, it wasn't really my thing. It's very literary, and I don't really read a lot of super literary things. So anyway, but it was good. I gave it 3 stars. Next, I read Anne of Windy Poplars by Ellen Montgomery. This is the book that I needed to read this month for the Anne-along read-along that I am hosting with Tia from Tia and All the Books. This was April's read, and this is all about Anne's time in, she becomes a principal of a high school, and it's her time spent there. I did not care for this one that much. It was a quick read. It was enjoyable, but it's kind of told partially in letters, partial letters from her to somebody else, and then also in regular story form. And just the combination of the two, the partial letters really threw me off, and the one-sided letters, it was all letters from her to someone specific, and there were no replies to it, so you never got the other side of it, and that bothered me. And I just felt like there were too many just like side stories in this, and too much of Anne putting herself in other, I don't know. It just wasn't my favorite. I gave it 3 stars. I'm excited for the next book. The next book I'm really excited for. I'm hoping it's going to be a good one. But this one was not my favorite of the group. Next, I have another middle grade book, and this is No Fixed Address by Susan Nielsen. This is the book that I read to complete Divination, which was a random number generator. I took all of my leftover books that were on my middle grade March TBR and put them in a random number generator, and this is the one that popped up that I needed to read, and it was enjoyable. It was a fun read. There were just some things in this that really threw me off, especially with it being middle grade. There was a lot of mention of just like casual sex and things like that that I did not feel was appropriate for middle grade. But the basic premise of this is that this boy, I don't even remember what his name is now. You guys know that me and names don't go well together. Felix and his mom are homeless, and they live in this van. And so it's kind of his story of how they got there, why they're there, all that kind of stuff. But through this book, there's this like random game show that he becomes a contestant on, and he's thinking that he's going to be able to get his mom out of the situation by winning this game show. And so that was very random, but you know, whatever. It was enjoyable. Like I said, there were just a few things that I really had issue with this book. So I only ended up giving it 3 stars, but it was a fun read for me. I would not let my kids read it though. Next, I have Where We Belong by Emily Giffin. This is the book that I read for Ancient Ruins, which is to read a book with a heart on the cover. This is one that I just had on my physical TBR that I had gotten probably at a thrift store or something. Emily Giffin's an author that I'll read sometimes when I just need something simple. This one was good. I don't know. I would say maybe like trigger warnings, whatever, for adoption. This deals heavily with adoption. So it follows Marion, who is a 36-year-old television producer. She's like living the high life. She lives in New York City. She's really rich. She's dating, wanting to get engaged to her boss. And then all of a sudden this teenager shows up at her front door, and it ends up being the daughter that she gave away for adoption when she was 18 years old. And so you get the backstory, you get the story from the daughter, you're getting dual perspectives from her point of view and from the daughter's point of view. The daughter's name is Kirby, I think. And so it's just kind of the history of that and how it came to be and all the feelings surrounding it and all of that. So I think it'd be interesting to get somebody's point of view who's kind of been in that situation, because my kids are not adopted. I was not adopted. I don't really have a lot of firsthand experience with that, but I enjoyed reading it. It was good, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. All right. The next one that I have is The Marvels by Brian Selznick. This is the one that I read for a book with an M on the cover, I think. Let's see, where did it end up going? Oh yeah, Herbology, a title that starts with M. So I read this one, and this is one, the first like 2/3 of the book is all pictures, and then you get the actual story at the end. This one was different. It was not what I was expecting. I didn't really know what this was about going into it at all. I just knew it was by Brian Selznick, and I've already read Wonderstruck and The Invention of Hugo Cabret and enjoyed them, and so I really, really enjoyed Brian Selznick's art style, so I knew I wanted to read it, and I had picked this up at a library sale for like 50 cents or something. This one was different, though. I don't even know how to explain it without like spoiling it, but it follows the Marvel like family line, and they're all a family of actors. It has heavily to do with actors, and then you jump, like that's the picture portion of it, and then in the actual like story portion of it, you jump ahead, and it's like 1997 or something like that, which that was weird. The whole time jump, not the time jump, but just the timing of it, it was really, really hard to stay in 1990. For it to be set in 1990, I feel like the 1990 time was not achieved well, because the man that we follow in this, his house is all like set in the 1800s, and so it's restored to be like it was in the 1800s, and so it just kind of throws everything way off. And even the little boy, you follow this little boy who's like run away from school and he's trying to find his uncle, and it's his uncle's house that he's going to. But even the little boy, like when you're following him around, it very much seems like it's set in the 1800s, that time era, not in 1990. Even when he's running away, and even when they like leave the house to go do things, it does not seem like it's set in 1990. And so I feel like that was not super well achieved. But it was an interesting story. It's based off of like something real that happened. But yeah, I don't really know how to explain this without completely spoiling it. So anyway, I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was not my favorite Brian Selznick. I think my favorite Brian Selznick is Wonderstruck. I've read all 3 of them now. I still think Wonderstruck is my favorite. I really enjoyed that one. All right, the next one that I read Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, and this is the one that I read for History of Magic, a book featuring witches and wizards. In this book, they're called magi, but they're witches and wizards. They have magic. I counted it. I looked on G from the Book Roast. She has a website all for the Magical Readathon, and they had a list of a bunch of recommendations for each of the prompts, and this did come up on the recommendations list for this prompt, so I'm counting it. But I buddy read this with Busy Batty Books and Robin from Busy Batty Books, and both of us kind of were let down by this book. This was super, super hyped, and I don't feel like it lived up to the hype for me. I appreciated the African setting in this. I appreciated the being able to tell, or having this fantasy story where none of the characters are white. I completely appreciated that. I love that. I listened to the audiobook, and I will admit, being American, the accent really threw me off. It took me a long time to be able to get the accent, and it's told from like 3 different perspectives, and so, but it was one narrator, and so trying to figure out who was talking sometimes was really difficult. But once I got the hang of it, it was an enjoyable book. I feel like there were a lot of parts of the book that were way too convenient. It was way too tropey. It is a YA book, so that may just be because it's YA. But I will say, like, the last quarter of the book, I really, really enjoyed. My favorite character in this is Anon. I will say that. I enjoyed it, but like I said, I just feel like there were too many holes in it for me. The other thing, personally, that I did not like was the author's note. She makes it perfectly clear in the author's note that she wrote this book for a specific reason, and it's a political reason. And I have found that I do not like when authors write books that are not political and they try to make them political in the author's note or at the end. I love that Tomi Adeyemi wrote this book and used her talents to try to do something about a problem that is in the world. I just don't think that it had to be pointed out to say, this is the problem, this is what I was trying to address. I think it's more impactful when the reader reads it and takes that themselves, rather than having to be told what they're supposed to be getting out of it. I think it's more powerful when you can write a book and you don't have to say what you want the reader to get out of it, that they just get it and that they interpret the book for themselves. So that's my 2 cents on that. But this ended up being a 3-star book for me, and I don't think I'm going to carry on with the series. It didn't pull me in enough for me to care. All right, moving on to 4-star books. I have Saving Winslow, also by Sharon Creech. This is a teeny tiny little middle grade book that I had gotten from the library for middle grade March. I'm trying to get through all my library books that I gotten out of the library, so there's quite a bit of middle grade being read around here. But in all fairness, I am trying to get the library books read. But this is a newer Sharon Creech book that I, saw at the library, and it's about this little boy. What's his name? Louis. And his dad brings home this very, very sickly donkey, and they think it's going to die, and he decides he's going to try to nurse it back to health. And that's kind of what the book's about. It was very short. It's a very, very quick read. Very beautiful story. I really, really enjoyed it. Gave it 4 stars. All right. Next, I have Towers Falling by Jewel Parker Rhodes. This is another one that I read during the stay-home reading rush, so more of my thoughts can be found in that vlog. But this is all centers around 9/11. It's set during the 15th anniversary of 9/11, and it is about our main character, Deja. She is going to a new school. She's homeless. She lives in a homeless shelter. She's going to a new school, and part of their curriculum is to learn about 9/11. And and they are in New York City. She lives in Brooklyn, and this really, really brought to light for me the fact that 9/11 means something completely different to New Yorkers than it does to, for instance, me, who lives in the Midwest. It is a much more traumatic experience for them. There's a lot of feelings surrounding 9/11 in New York. Everybody's handling it differently, but her dad, for example, when he finds out that they are learning about 9/11, goes off the rails and is just like, absolutely not. You should not be learning about this. She's in 5th grade in this book. You should not be learning about this. I don't want you hearing about this. You're too young, all of that. So it definitely gave me a different perspective on what 9/11 means to different people, and it gave me an appreciation for that. And I really love this book. This book was written as a teaching tool for kids and for teachers to use with students, and I appreciated that as well. Very, very powerful book, and I definitely recommend this one. I will probably encourage my kids to read this one in another year or two when I feel like they're more of the age where they can understand the impact of 9/11 and what it meant. But yeah, that one got 4 stars. Oh, and this one I read for the contemporary, Muggle Studies was to read a contemporary, so I read this one for that. All right, my next 4-star read is Where the Crawdads Sing. I did this as a buddy read with Rainy from Rainy Day Reads. We had talked about reading this earlier in the year, and this was the month we were going to read it, and so we read it this month. And I actually ended up being able to count this one for Defense Against the Dark Arts, which is a book that is set at the sea or on the coast, and this one is set in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, which was on the coast. I think I knew that it was set in the swamps of North Carolina, or in the marshlands. I didn't really realize where it was at though. So this was not on my TBR, but this is the one I ended up using for that prompt. I really enjoyed this one. I don't know if it really lives up to all the hype. There's a ton of hype around this book, but I did really enjoy this one. It follows, what's the girl's name? I don't remember now. Marsh girl, Kaya. So it follows Kaya. She lives in the marshes of the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and she kind of ends up getting abandoned at a fairly young age. Her dad's with her for a while. She has siblings around for a little bit, but eventually she does end up becoming abandoned, and it's just kind of how she survives. And it was very intriguing. It's kind of told dual timeline where you're getting her story, and then in the future you're finding out that there's this murder and people are thinking it's her, like she's the one that did it. And so you're kind of, eventually the timelines come together. It was good. Like I said, I don't know if it really lives up to all the hype. I will say that when I got done reading this book, immediately I was like, ooh, this gives me The Giver of Stars vibes. So The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes, I read in February, I think. That book, I feel like if you have read this and you like this, you will like Giver of Stars. It has just a very similar vibe to the book. Giver of Stars is set in the 30s. It's about the Pack Horse Library in Appalachia. It's different, but there's just a similar vibe. Like I said, I don't even know what other atmosphere maybe in the book that I feel like are very, very similar. So definitely check that out if you've read this and enjoyed it. But I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I didn't enjoy it. I just don't know if it lived up quite all the way to the hype. All right, next I have Artemis Fowl by Owen Colfer. This is one that is on my 2020 TBR. Actually, this and Where the Crawdads Sing and Children of Blood and Bone are all on my 2020 TBR. 3 books in 1 month. I was so excited. But anyway, this one was a middle grade, and I just had some extra time, so I figured I'd pick it up, and I loved this book so much. I was trying to explain to my husband what it was about, and he just looked at me like, I think you're crazy. So the basic storyline of it is you're following Artemis Fowl, who is this like evil genius mastermind kid whose father's been kidnapped. His mother is like in this super deep depression. He's kind of taking care of himself. He has these bodyguards that are with him, but he's kind of on his own, and he is just this genius child, and he decides he's going to try to steal some leprechaun gold. And the way to do that is to kidnap a leprechaun. Except in this world, leprechauns are not these little characters dressed up in green sitting at the end of the rainbow. Leprechauns are actually these like super high-tech fairies that live underground. And so anyway, this kind of battle or standoff ensues between Artemis and the fairy world, and you get all of that. This was so much fun. I definitely want to continue reading this series. Initially, I wanted to read it because the movie is coming out. And then after I read the book, I watched the trailer for the movie. Yeah, I don't even know if I want to watch the movie now because it looks horrific. Obviously, whoever made the movie never read the book. They pretty much took all the characters' names and made up an entirely new story because it is nothing like the book. And now I understand why everybody who loves the book is super pissed off about the movie. So, anyway, this was fantastic. Really quick read. Really want to read the rest of them now. 4 stars. It wasn't quite 5 stars. There were a few things that were just like too easy, too convenient. It's like, oh, so the fairies now have this that are just like at their disposal. You know, things like that that I'm like not a huge fan of. But overall, really, really great story. Just a lot of fun. Another 4-star read that's like total opposite end of the spectrum is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. This is the book that I read in my like real life book club this month, and this was awesome. I've heard this kind of sometimes compared to Educated, and I will say right now, this I way preferred to Educated. Like Educated I gave 2 stars, this I gave 4 stars. It was almost 5 stars, really close. But this is about the main, or it's a nonfiction memoir about Jeanette and her time with her parents who were not super attentive to their children's needs when they were younger. They were very selfish. There was a lot of probably mental issues going on with both of her parents. Her dad was a drunk. Her mom was just really selfish. She had no desire to be a mom, and so she didn't really take care of her children. And they grew up in extreme, extreme poverty in West Virginia. And eventually, her and her siblings end up moving to New York City and make lives for themselves, and they're well-to-do. And their parents follow them to New York City, but choose to live homeless. That's the lifestyle. And this I just felt was so powerful. The one thing that I think differentiates this book from Educated and why I preferred this one more was I feel like Educated was kind of an up yours to Tara Westover's parents. It's like, you know, you did all this, and you can tell there was a lot of hate in her heart towards her parents. And this book was very much like, yeah, my parents did these things. It wasn't cool, but they were my parents, and I'm going to continue to love them anyway because they're my parents. I realize on the other side of this that they had their own issues, and they could have done better. They chose not to, but that was who they were as a person, and that does not define me as a person. I can be my own person and still love them as my parents, and see that they did something wrong, but love them anyway. And I just thought that message was so, so powerful. So yeah, highly, highly recommend this book if you have not read it yet. I think the audiobook is narrated by Jeanette Walls, so I think that's really powerful as well. I also watched the movie of this, and I will say I did not care for the movie that much. It didn't really twist anything, but it left a lot out that I felt was super impactful to me. So anyway, 4 stars, really enjoyed. All right, now we're moving on to 5-star reads. Oh, no, we're not. I have one more 4-star read. Another 4-star book. No, this was a 3-star book, and I forgot to mention it with my 3-star books. So 3-star book that I did read, I listened to the audiobook. I don't have it here. That's why I forgot about it. Is The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle. I don't remember what her last name is now. Hold on. I'm going to find it. Kim Michelle Richardson. So this is one that is also about the Pack Horse Library. I know when The Giver of Stars came out, there was a lot of issues with plagiarism and copying ideas and that sort of thing. And I will say right now that these two books are nothing alike. They both have to do with the Packhorse Library in Appalachia in the 1930s. That's about it. So this book, Giver of Stars, had to do with that, but it was more about the mining town and kind of the town drama and all that. This book really focuses on the blue people of Troublesome Creek, Kentucky. And this is a thing that was actually real. I got to chapter 2 before I had to Google it and like see what this was all about. But there was this man that came from France, I think, and he married this like redhead from Kentucky, and he had this genetic condition that turned his skin blue. It actually is like a genetic mutation where your blood turns brown instead of blue, and it makes your skin then appear blue. And so he was blue, and for some reason in the chances of the universe, he ends up marrying this woman who has the recessive gene for this same genetic mutation. And so all of their children, not all of their children, I think 4 out of their 7 children ended up blue as well, and their skin was blue tinged. And so because people started kind of being prejudiced against them and having, they ended up getting like negative reaction from the community, they tended to isolate themselves. And so there was a lot of kind of inbreeding that happened, and so the genetic mutation just kept kind of going down from generation to generation. I think the last one died off in 1970, I think. Is when the last blue person passed away. And so anyway, this was a thing. It was very prevalent during that time. And this follows a blue person, Cussie, and she becomes a Packhorse librarian. And it's just kind of about her. Her dad wants her to marry. That's very difficult, as you can imagine, because she is blue. She is oftentimes discriminated against, just like a black person would have been during the time, because she was colored just like a black person would have been during that time. She was treated very similar to black people. And so you kind of get that through the book, the discrimination that she goes through and kind of her journey, because she doesn't really fit in with the black community, but she doesn't fit in with the white community, and she's kind of by herself, and she becomes a Packhorse librarian. And so she's going to all these different places and delivering books. You get to hear a lot about that. And eventually she comes in contact with a doctor who wants to try to start treating her medically and kind of what that looked like. I will say the writing style in this was very simplistic, especially after reading some other books this month, and especially, with Giver of Stars. I much preferred Giver of Stars to this book. Giver of Stars was like a 4.5, almost 5-star read for me. This was like 3-star, generous 3-star. The writing was just not the best. The storyline was okay. There were some things that were left unanswered, like issues came up and then they just kind of disappeared, and you don't really ever know what happened to them. So I wasn't a huge fan of that. There were just I felt like there were too many characters that weren't really well fleshed out. So yeah, I definitely preferred Giver of Stars, but this was definitely, I'm glad I read it. I read this one with Lindsay from Lindsay's Little Library. It was just kind of I read this one for my book club for this upcoming month. So I had this book at home, not at home. I had it checked out on my e-reader anyway, and so Lindsay had posted on Instagram that she was going to be reading it, and so I was like, oh, I have that one checked out right now. And it just kind of fell in that we ended up reading it together and chatting about it a little bit, so that was fun. Yeah, so anyway, that's my thoughts on that. 3 stars. Moving on to my 5-star books now. So the first 5-star book that I have is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I read this for the shape-shifting Transfiguration, which was to read a book about shape-shifting, and so this definitely has shape-shifting in it. And I love this book. This is probably one of my favorite in the series, and it still holds true. I watched the movie, and especially on the tails of reading and watching The Chamber of Secrets, I feel like the Chamber of Secrets movie was so long, and there was so much stuff that didn't really need to be there, and this movie was so captivating, and I was like super into it the whole time. And so I feel like that's the same way the book is. But yeah, easy 5 stars, and I'm looking forward to reading The Goblet of Fire this next month. All right, and then the next five-star book that I have is actually another graphic novel that I read in ebook format, and that is When Stars Are Scattered by Victoria Jameson and Omar Mohammed, I'm pretty sure is his name. Let me double check that. Yeah, Omar Mohammed and Victoria Jameson. This is one, I think I read this one also during the stay home reading rush probably, but this counted for my astronomy challenge for the owls, which was to read a book at night, the majority of it at night, which I read this whole thing. So it counted for that. It counted for that, and this was the last book that I read for my owls, so this completed all my owls. But yeah, this book was about Omar's experience in a refugee camp in Kenya, I think. No, I'm forgetting. It was in Africa. So he was originally from Somalia. I had to think about it. He's originally from Somalia, and when he was 4 years old, he ended up having to flee with his little brother, and they were separated from their parents, and they ended up at this refugee camp by themselves. And it's just their story about how they survived in this refugee camp for years, and eventually they come to the United States, and you get to hear all about that process. I loved this book. I thought it was such a smart portrayal in graphic novel format of this man's story and his, just they focused so much on this book in appreciating the gifts that you've been given. Don't focus on what you don't have, but just appreciate the gifts that you have been given and really focus on those things. And I thought that that was such a great message. I think that this book was super appropriate for kids. It was definitely middle grade appropriate, and it's a really great way for kids that age to experience what somebody else is going through on the other side of the world. It was not political at all, which I super appreciated. As previously stated, that is not one of my favorite things when books get really political. This did not get political. It was just very much like, if you want to help, here's some resources at the end of the book, and this is my story. And I loved that. But yeah, highly suggest you check this one out. It is a new release. And then my favorite book that I read this month, I actually started in March and finished right at the very beginning of April, and that is Free Lunch by Rex Ogle. I've talked about this in a couple of other videos, I think. I definitely talked about it during the stay home reading rush, the tag that went along with this. This book was remarkable. This is a nonfiction middle grade book, and it is about Rex's life living in poverty. And it was kind of hard because right at the beginning of the month I read a bunch of books all about poverty, like back to back to back, and it got to be a lot real fast because I read this and The Glass Castle and Where the Crawdads Sing, and I want to say maybe one more, maybe like Towers Falling, like all on top of each other. And it was a lot. I read a lot about living in poverty this month because I read No Fixed Address also. The When Stars Are Scattered, it has to do with poverty. I read a lot about poverty this month, but this one specifically really stood out because it was written from a very raw place. Rex obviously is grown, he's a grown adult, but it has to do with his mom signed him up for the free lunch program at school, and it's just the stigma around that and how he was really embarrassed about that, and kind of some of the stuff that he went through living with his mom and, his grandma, knowing that, they were having trouble and trying to help and his mom wouldn't accept the help. Things like that, and him just being super angry at his mom and her boyfriend and what that looked like. I thought this was a very impactful book. It was hard to read. Definitely triggers for child abuse and things like that. I don't know as though it's something I would want my kids to read right away, but I think for kids that are going through this situation, it was super important that this book is out there. I'm so glad that Rex wrote this book in the way that he did. Once again, there's nothing political, there's no agenda in this book. It's just his story and his, how he got through it. And basically, at the end, there's not an easy answer. It's not like, oh, you just got to do this and magically it all gets fixed, and so I don't know. Go check this one out. Even for adults, I feel like this book is just super great, and I've never ever heard anybody talk about it before. So this was one that I just picked up during middle grade March. I was at the library. I wanted to try to find a nonfiction book to read, and the spine kind of stood out to me, and I picked it up and I'm like, oh, that looks good. And I'm so glad I did, because it is a favorite of mine now. So those are all of the books that I read this month. This video is going to be super long because I've been filming for almost 40 minutes. So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up really quickly and say that I hope that you enjoyed this. If you have read any of these or have any thoughts about any of these, I would love for you to leave a comment down below and find me and chat with me. I also have my Instagram account and Goodreads linked down below as well, so you can find me there too to chat as well. And yeah, other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you stick around and subscribe. And until next time, see ya.